So week 5 we're going to talk about refueling, and you would think it's a no-brainer. Refuel, take a sandwich, bag of nuts, you should be okay. However, you always have to prepare for the worst, and if somebody gets injured, if we run into bad weather, if we have an animal encounter, if we get lost, you always have to be prepared to have more fuel in case we need it to disperse out through the course of our hike. So, the other thing is you don't want to be testing out your fuel sources just on the trail. I mean, what if you have diarrhea, upset stomach, cramping, nausea? Nobody wants to be hiking like that, especially if we're really asking the legs to do what they have to do and having to be on our game because of a sketchy surface. So, test your fuel sources out now. And you should be training, so you should have ample opportunity to test them out. Having the choices of candy, probably not the best idea. Has a fuel source. I mean, it certainly tastes good. It reminds me of being a kid and Halloween, but the more the sugar in your fuel source, the more the insulin has to be secreted. You have no choice. It's a normal reaction. And the higher the insulin, the lower your insulin dump will go. So usually what happens is you have sugar, insulin secreted. The sweeter the fuel source, the more the insulin. And that's cool because it gets dispersed straight from the bloodstream right into the cell. But insulin isn't smart, and it'll hang out for a while. So after all the fuel is out of the bloodstream into the cell, insulin's still around. It'll want to scurry for more stuff. You'll get low, or you'll get hypoglycemic, and that'll cause you to be cranky, get some cramps, search for cravings. So we don't want that on the trail. So what I would do is go for a low glycemic index fuel source. That usually means no sugar. The problem is, as you go with more processed food, and processed is okay, but highly processed food, like this nut butter, will sometimes have to have some form of palatability to it. And that's why the companies mix the sugar. So if you can find a somewhat natural source, not so processed, better off. I think the nut butter is pretty decent. It still has some sugar in it. Sometimes if you go with athletic type of refueling goo, I think it'll be better. I love Yum Butter. I think it has a decent balance between carbohydrates and sugars. So if you have more dominant carbohydrates and less sugar, better off. As far as having carbohydrates and protein, for the training process, you definitely need protein. Usually I like to have protein of like 30 grams if you're really into training and you're hitting your max right after exercise, within 2 hours at least. This Yum Butter has high amounts of protein in it, per 2 tablespoons. That's a lot, and the palatability is okay because they try to limit the amount of sugar. It makes it a little dry, so it takes some getting used to. And again, you don't want to get used to this right on the trail. So I usually have to follow this with a lot of fluids. I'm used to it. I like the sources, and it's not too heavy. Not too heavy, and it's concentrated, so less I have to carry. So I like Yum Butters. That's as far as the goo type supply. I would always go with granola. Granola is nice because it's considered a low processed whole food type of approach. It does have a lot, but it does take some breaking down. I mean, a lot of carbohydrate, a low amount of sugar, a lot of fiber too. And depending on the trail mix that you get, you can make it on your own. You can get it pre-packaged. But you always have to learn to read the labels. Again, more carbohydrate, less sugar. You don't really need the protein when we're on the trail. When you're training, yes, protein. Sometimes you can actually get, these are processed bars. These have no sugar at all, which is nice, but again, the taste, a little tough. If I know I'm just doing this for carbohydrate refueling afterward and high protein refueling, I think it's tolerable. But it doesn't taste that great. So you can see on the label, low glycemic index, low GI, which is good. So that's an option. I don't think anybody will steal it because it tastes nasty. I shouldn't say tastes nasty. It's not as good as the sugar. You can also do, the only problem with packages like this, they take up space. So the bigger your package, the less room you have, and the less room for equipment or cameras or water. So this is pretty decent. I'd probably leave this at the tent site and use it when we get back, but this is an option too. Not too heavy either. Now, this is whole food. This is vacuum packed, but this is also very heavy. So having this as a source, definitely carbohydrate, because you still have the whole bean in here. Definitely carbohydrate, good protein, a lot of fiber. I wouldn't test this on the trail. Why? Because it's beans, and you know what beans do. If you're not used to the beans, I mean, beans are very healthy, but if you just start with it, you're going to have gas the night after, and you should be the last one in the excursion. Otherwise, if you're the first one, everybody gets the gas. So that's why it's important to test out your fueling sources before we get to the mountain. I think fish is always good. The only problem with fish, the aroma of fish is tough. So always take your Ziploc bags. It's not animal proof as far as smell even after you're done, but it'll still, you'll take your trash out of the park when we're done. And again, the argument is that will we be attracting animals with taking in highly aromatized food? Probably not. But don't forget, you also have to have a fork or some utensil. And if you choose to take the old-fashioned cans, please bring a can opener. This is a tiny can opener that you have to do manually. This obviously is way too big to put anywhere. You can't take up that much space in your backpack. And same thing with carrying all this stuff on the plane. You have to pay extra for your tent and your sleeping bag and your equipment, so keep it minimal. I'm a pesco ovo vegetarian, so I always like carrying the fish packs, whether it's tuna fish or salmon. You can't take too much tuna fish, so if you're using it for protein sources, you have to be careful with the mercury in tuna. Canned stuff, probably better, it's a little heavier, but then there's, in can and tin foil, there's BPAs that you have to worry about later on down the line. Probably not a concern right now. Those are toxins. If you're going to be going with refueling, I always like to have tea. This is my caffeine source, although it's not that much caffeine. I usually pack tea, and I have tea every morning. That's how I start my ritual. I think it's a great antioxidant for its EGCG, especially if it's green. Black tea has caffeine in it. It's a little bitter, but remember, when you're doing this stuff, you always have to have this. So try to if you can get a collapsible one, if you can get something that's not so heavy, better for you. You always have to have that to hold while you're making the jet fuel heated water. And then again, after you take that kind of stuff, there's going to be a caffeine response. And you're going to have to pee, so try to do it before we leave, otherwise you'll be holding back the group because you have to pee every once in a while. As a guy, I think it's okay. You just step off the trail, try to find a place where animals won't get the scent of your salt in the urine, and you go. But if anything else where you have to poop will take more time. That brings me to, if you have headaches because of caffeine withdrawal or cramps because of trying out a new fuel source, you will have to have medicine. I think it's important to take allergy medicine. But if you can take it with a chewable and or a melt in the mouth, I think it'd be better because you just have to pop it open, put it in your mouth, not have to stop for a break of water. Whether it's headache, allergies, or stuffy nose. I like this as a refuel source because taking fluid, if you're not used to it, there's no taste with water. Sometimes doing airborne, not for its homeopathic ingredients, but more for its salt and its flavor. Airborne does add a little bit of flavor to just regular water if we're taking bottled water. So it's another way to rehydrate and rehydrate with salt. Those of you who cramp real easy, you want more salt in your water. Finally, having something like this right after we get back, probably not a good idea. I think alcohol is a nice way to celebrate, but the problem is if you try to refuel for the next day with alcohol, you're going to be, number one, causing a diuresis. Alcohol and caffeine make you pee. Number two, you'll be making the liver busy with trying to get rid of the alcohol, and alcohol can last for a couple hours. I need you guys on your game for the next day. If we want to save it for the last day, I have no problems with that. But alcohol is not good. And if you're training now, and you refeed or refuel with bad, crappy food or alcohol, you're just tossing out your training that you just did and you're suffering for. So please, whether you're fasting or whether you're just in a training mode, the refeeding and refueling phase is very important. It's important because that's when the body tries to take advantage of all the building blocks, and that doesn't have that many building blocks in it. Make you feel good, just like the candy, but we're talking about trying to make your body a temple and trying to maximize on its rebuilding phase. So hopefully this gives a little bit of an idea about what I do. Taking whole food, obviously a sandwich, if you're used to it, fine. Sharing food on the trail, you have to be careful because other people are used to their type of food and their choices. If we start sharing and you're trying out a certain butter for the first time or a certain milk product for the first time, or there happens to be a nut that you're allergic to, I would always say stick to your own food sources. It's nice to share, but maybe on the last day. So.